Okay, so the next two manipulation modes we need to talk about are the reference and plane manipulation modes. And because they're actually very, very similar, we'll be dealing with them together. So we need another object here. I'll just unhide that. And what were you doing when we're using the reference or plane manipulation modes is we're referring to a different object's coordinate system for the manipulation of this object. So what I'll do is I switch into reference mode there. And if I right-click on the reference button or the plane button, you'll see that I get a menu, which are actually both identical. And what I can do is I can pick new reference. So I'll pick a new reference, that's for the object over there, and we'll see that in terms of transformation, that's not a whole lot has changed. However, if I go to rotation, you'll see that I'm now rotating around the green object, i.e. I'm using the green object's coordinate system for the manipulation of the blue object. Also, if I would rotate, for example, the green object, and I'll go into my translation, just hit pick new reference, grab that guy's reference there. You'll see now that the axis system for the blue object has now aligned itself to the actual axis system for the green object. So it's great for manipulating objects in relation to each other. It's also fantastic for modeling operations because these manipulation modes, reference and plane, will also work on components or at a component level. So let's take, for example, a scaling operation. And you'll see that I still have this object selected as the reference object. So now when I scale, it's actually scaling towards the center point of the green model. Okay, so again, it will work on a component level. Another common example of where this would be useful is if I'm in a translation mode, for example. Let's just zoom in here a little bit so we can see what's going on. Now I wish to shift these polygons along this middle edge, right? So what I can now do is I can just go on to here, pick edge reference, select that middle edge, and you'll see now that when I select my manipulator, it will now align itself to this edge, which means that I can, of course, slide polygons along an edge, maybe slide points along an edge, that sort of thing. Very, very useful, again, for modeling. Now, one thing to point out, so I now go into my Explorer, under Data, Reference Planes, you'll see here a list of actual reference planes that's being used. And every time I create one, you will find it listed here with various things, for example, cell size, etc., etc., snap sizes and all that sort of thing. Now what that actually means is if I switch here to reference plane, what you'll see is it's creating an actual plane. And this is the main real difference between reference and plane, is that I'm getting a visual cue as to a grid aligned with the axis space. So if I change the cell spacing or maybe the snap sizing or the extents maybe, you'll see I can hereby manipulate the actual visual cue for the plane manipulation mode, thus snapping along this grid. So all in all, it's a very, very useful way of working. Now, one other thing to mention is if you're in the extended manipulator mode, and let's say, for example, reference, in the reference mode. Now, one thing that is well worth remembering is if I move my pivot to a certain point and I'm in reference mode, it automatically will adopt that component that I have snapped to as the object for the reference. So, or as the component for the reference. So for example, if I'm on this point, it is now using the coordinate system for that point for my manipulation, and it automatically notices that because I've snapped to that, that's where it should take its reference from.